later be uploaded on the seminar's dedicated webpage, which will redirect you to our YouTube channel. During the session, please use the Q&A function in Zoom instead of posting your questions in the comment section, so we are better able to track your questions and catalog them as Joanna responds to them. If you have any burning questions, of course, raise your hand during the session, and I will coordinate your question with Joanna. In any case, at the end of this seminar, we will allow for 10-15 minutes at the end to answer your questions and ask any questions that you may have, either by posting it in the Q&A or by raising your hand and speak to Joanna directly. So about Joanna, very briefly, Joana Geraldi is an associate professor at the Copenhagen Business School in the Department of Organizations, and leads the Center for Advanced Studies in Projects. She was a former colleague at UCL, and Joanna will give us the details about her interests and her an amazing research portfolio. So without further ado, welcome, Joanna. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Leo. Thanks for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure to be here and share with you a idea which combines a bit of some of the publications I've done in the past, and puts it together in a kind of a larger framework that is not published in a specific paper in particular, but kind of combines things a bit together. And in many ways, the presentation is kind of a UCL baby, because many of the ideas kind of got started there, or even before there. So just to manage your expectations a bit, so my core question here is the question that everyone is asking themselves. So how can we actually manage then this portfolio of mega projects that we currently have, leading and changing and designing our engineering systems in a successful way? And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but there won't be any kind of completely new things or silver bullets. It's going to be mostly based on literature, things that actually have already been published by me or by many of the other colleagues that I kind of put together. There's also no fancy empirical case new that I'm going to be sharing. It's more going to be about ideas, about the different ways of seeing things that we perhaps already used to see or used to talk about. But sometimes, maybe, when we're looking into things, the same things in a slightly different way, we might see it, things in a different angle. As you can see, this is my one-year-old child. When she was 1 year old, she is now turning 10, looking into a very familiar object to all of us. But in that kind of context, you start thinking about other things like safety and even her curiosity, why on earth would you actually do that? And in a similar kind of spirit of what March would call technology foolishness, I'm here trying to share with you kind of almost like a half-baked idea. And let's just see what you find, or what you think about it. And I'm very much looking forward to your comments. So, and by the way, it's the first time I'm presenting it, so it might be that I'm not on time, but Elias will just make sure that I'll stick with the time. This idea has been growing with me for a long time. It started when I was still in Brazil, where I studied engineering. And during my studies, one of my professors in organization theory talked to me and said, look, Joanna, if you'd like to make any impact in the world, study projects. Because every 2 buildings we build, we could have built a 3rd one, but because projects are just so low in success, we just have to kind of around 33% kind of failure rate. And at the time, we're having kind of a lot of quality management and so on, and trying to reduce the kind of minimum increases in efficiency and productivity. And that was just amazing. Now suddenly I can actually make a proper impact. So the first thing I did is what all keen students would do. I started doing internships in projects. And it was, well, my dream of 33% or reducing the 33% turned out to be a little bit harder. But then I thought, well, it might be just Brazil. And, it's all kind of not structured enough, not efficient enough. So where would a young engineer, I was about 21 at the time, think about going to try to find a real high efficiency and order in the management of projects? Could you please write down in the chatting function? What do you guys think? Young engineer searching for order. Any ideas?
And we won't have time for that.
Oh,
as
okay.
Just focusing. No, I'm just taking that. Working on the project. These questions, you're really not in a position to think about.
Then we just go straight to the answer. So I went then to Germany, and in there I was trying to find a higher efficiency in projects. I worked in projects and did then my PhD later, trying to reconcile order and chaos, because it turned out that creating high efficiencies, even the Germans were not that good at it. After trying to find the perfect processes for managing projects, I realized that we needed more. And then I went into the UK, and that's when I learned a bit more about the social intricacies of projects, how projects actually are embedded in a political context, and requires much more than only the management of the processes. And then from there, I decided to have children, and then it became obvious to me, oh yeah, maybe Japan could have been a good one, but around the 2000s, Germany was still good. Now they're questionable. Anyway, and then I decided to have children, and then Denmark became quite an attractive country to go to. And Denmark taught me to look not only into the efficiencies and the processes and also the social intricacies, but actually asking a much bigger question. So why are we doing this project? What kind of impact do we have? How could we create a more sustainable way of living through the projects that we have? Yeah, indeed it is. So then my life story is not actually my life story, but it has a lot of parallel to the life story of project management and project studies thinking. So we started as mavericks around the 40s and moved and tried to increase efficiency and effectiveness from the 50s onwards. Around the 80s and 90s, we started actually kind of realizing, oh, actually there's people here as well, and things don't work the way we're thinking about. And much more recently, we're more asking the questions of why are we doing these projects? Why should we care? What is important? What kind of impact would we like to create with the projects that we have? And in that regard, it's nice to perhaps bring into the table some of the thoughts from our dear Peter Morris, who always challenged us as we were at UCL and also afterwards to think up, to think strategically, to think about what the projects are actually creating and why do we actually do these projects. And evoking his ideas and some of the others that I'm mentioning here, I'm proposing a concept which I'm calling the projectification of engineering systems. Now, this is a little bit complex, but it starts with the idea that we have engineering systems which are actually a living social technical systems. So they're partly designed, they're partly evolving, and they are never ever completed. And this is kind of the classic understanding and ideas of an engineering systems. And when we talk about engineering systems, we're talking about kind of transportation systems, healthcare systems, and so on. All the kind of social technical systems that create infrastructure that makes our modern life possible. Now, we have lots of projects that shape the way in which the engineering systems function. So they impact engineering systems. So which means we have in a way a portfolio of projects shaping and transforming our engineering systems. And a big question then is how can we actually manage that portfolio in an intelligent way? And in order to understand that, we need to situate this idea of the projectification of engineering systems within the context we are in. And therefore, first I'd like to we're going to be talking about the locus of the management effort, which is also a movement that we've done in project management, but also in other areas, to not only focusing on the management inside of the project and the inner dynamics of the project, but also thinking about what is happening around the project and how can we create a context for the project to function in a nice way. And for that sake, also for the portfolio of projects to function in a nice way. So that's kind of one of the main pillars or ideas of the concept of the projectification of the engineering system. Another thing is that as we think about projectification, we also need to embed it in the shifts of the current society, in our current zeitgeist. And for that, I'm going into a concept called the project society, which takes projects or actions as the starting point of how we define everything else in our lives. So the space, the time, and the relationships we're in. And it takes them projects into a different level, thinking of them as a human condition and a form in which we're organizing not only engineering systems, but everything around our lives. Now, having talked about the shift in the locus of the management effort and the shift in society, I'm then taking a theoretical perspective, a particular lenses to look into some of the issues that emerge as we make those this cognitive shifts. We actually see that managing the project portfolio is much harder than the classic project portfolio methods that we currently have. And for us then to embrace those challenges as opposed to try to just overly design them, I bring in the so-called constitutive approaches to paradox, which is just a way of perceiving paradox. I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. So these three things then provide our core foundation for how we actually can develop this projectification of engineering systems. Now, have we created the foundations of it? We can also think of the implications. And implications I discuss in terms of 4 classic challenges or paradoxes that we actually need to deal with. And I give examples of how could we then engage with these 4 different challenges, classic challenges and filled with paradoxes, and how could we engage with it in a way that we can reframe the paradox and move the conversation beyond what we currently have. Now, that's the agenda of today. We're going to start talking about the middle part here, the projectification of the engineering systems. I'm going to use the example of La Sagrada Familia here and there to make our illustration. And then we're going to be talking about the foundations and then about the several different implications we have. Now, let's just move then into the engineering systems. So as I mentioned before, engineering systems are this kind of social technical systems aimed at fulfilling an important function in society, be it health or transportation or many other, all the kind of things that makes our modern life. And what is interesting about the systems is that actually they are always changing. They are living. They are partly things that we can design, but they also evolve and evolve in unforeseen ways. And therefore, it's actually interesting to think about them, the projects inside of the engineering systems, as the projects then become this major vehicle in which we can actually change and intervene in the engineering system. So the photo behind us is construction site in Fehmarnbelt. Now we're actually trying to make a bridge between us and Germany here in Denmark and Germany. And of course, there's kind of all sorts of issues happening there, but that's a kind of a major intervention in our engineering systems. And that's kind of when mega projects come in. Mega projects don't just do a little nudge, but they bring the engineering systems and make a big shock in it and taken that as a system and hence highly connected with different parts, we make the change, and then we are going to have some of the foreseen benefits we wanted, but we also might have all sorts of other things that we might not want. And it is very important that we also partly design, partly kind of shape the way in which our systems function. And currently we do have quite a big challenge in front of us, actually just exactly now at us, not in front of us, which is the kind of the boundaries we have in terms of our planet and issues like climate change, but also biodiversity and many other problems that are actually putting into question to what extent can we actually continue living in the planet Earth, and how can we live also with the amount of people we have, and how can we continue living with the conditions we currently have, which are nice in Western countries. Another way of looking at it is just trying to use the projects in order to develop a more sustainable world and work towards the 17 Sustainable Developmental Goals that the UN has proposed. So we actually have quite a big task in our hands. As academics and as practitioners, we have a lot to do to create the engineering systems that we require for us to continue being able to live with the standard of living that we currently have. And the idea of actually using projects to influence our current social technical systems is not new, and there's many people working on it. For example, even Gilles and some colleagues from Brighton are talking about the relevance of using mega projects as examining the social technical transitions that will help us to do, for example, the green transition. So mega project is really important, and it's going to be a fundamental piece that will help us as a society to go in that direction. And they are huge, as Flubjerg showed again and again, but these are kind of a couple of examples of projects that together already amount to the death between China and the US at the time in which this was published. So we're talking about big money, big investments, an important contribution to the world. And we need to be focusing on this, and we need to be learning how to do that, as I mentioned before, in a more successful way. Therefore, I think it's important for us to think about the ways of managing mega projects, not only as one mega project, but also this projectification of mega projects, this collection, this family of mega projects. How can we create a governance for that? How can we create the practices that can actually move across in between the different projects that we're faced with? And maybe UK is providing a very good example, because it's an outstanding mega project ecosystem that has been developed over the past years. However, it's not enough to just take the ideas of project portfolio management that we currently have and apply it into the engineering systems. I don't believe it's enough, because what we currently have in the project portfolio management processes actually maintain with this more kind of rational view, for example, in terms of the definition of success. And even when we're talking about mega project and what would be a successful mega project, we also maintain the same narrative and the same kind of concerns again and again and again. And I argue that we need to change from that. Let's just remind ourselves of what those concerns are. So first, we talk again and again about the projects and mega projects in particular being over time, over budget, over and over again. And this is kind of the shadows of the Iron Triangle over and over again, that we actually have known and know for sure that it's not actually perhaps the best way or a good way of considering project success. Of course, there's a lot of politics behind it, and there's many reasons that actually make us keep doing it, but we know that it's wrong and insufficient measurements. We know that it's really hard to measure against what, how reliable are our estimations really. It also doesn't help us in terms of strategy, as Mailer even talks in the textbook. I mean, it's kind of really old knowledge, the zone of no brain, the zone of no strategy, when you actually try to optimize for all three of them at the same time. So we know all of this. But yet, are we really prepared to take the consequences of going beyond the iron triangle as a way of understanding project success and understanding, therefore, what it means to manage projects in a successful way? For example, as we've learned with the Sydney Opera House, project success may take much longer, or there's a time gap, a temporal disconnect between what is considered to be success, or what happens at the end of the project, and the outcomes of the project kind of a few years later. This does not mean that if we wait 20 years, then all projects are going to be successful, because we have major failures that continue to be major failures 20 years on. But it just means that there's a temporal disconnect between the time in which we finish the project and the kind of benefits that we actually are going to take out of the project. We also learned by looking into projects like the Taipu that project success might be rather subjective. So, for example, the project at Taipu was considered quite a successful system of dams that have actually produced about 2.6 billion megawatts hour for about more than 3,000 people. So it's a beautiful project, and it also promoted Latin America, and it provided we had a stable and clean source of energy. However, this also meant that over 10,000 families had to relocate into different locations. And it has been started and done, most of it, during the part of the dictatorship in projects, which we actually try to or tend to forget. And the entire area around the Taipu is still having huge problems. Now it's nearly 40 years since the opening, and we still have a region that is plagued by poverty, alcoholism, and other kind of social issues. So there's a project that is successful and unsuccessful at the same time. So this means that actually only considering projects in an iron triangle and only trying to put projects into a box of success and failure won't help us to do what we really want to do in terms of managing projects more successful. Success is not enough of a concept. So one way of sorting it was what Ika proposed. Okay, we just kind of take it apart. There's project success and there's project management success. However, this is actually also not enough. Because imagine if we're actually taking one apart from the other, then we're thinking that project management would be independent of project success. And how can one differentiate then between the project success of the process and of the outcome if the outcome is shaped through the process? So if there's no relationship between one and the other, then actually the whole point of managing projects become meaningless, because there's no relationship. We can't control, we can't do anything about it. And that would be a bit of a sad position to be in. There are some comments in the chatting. Elias, should I address them or should I just continue?
Whatever works for you.
Okay, so
we can leave it for later, or
I'll just leave it for later so I can continue this piece. So taking that we can't actually trust or it's not enough for us to think about the concept of project success, how can we embrace then this projectification of the engineering system, and how can we develop a critical agenda that will help us to improve the projects and do the things that we need to do so we can actually continue living this planet for that sake and have a nice life in the meantime. So now that's the question. So small question, and I think something that everyone is trying to address. Now, the idea then is to think about, as Elias suggested, so we start this seminar series talking about the future proving of engineering systems. So perhaps, as opposed to thinking about proving, so which means would create some sense of certainty, we would need to kind of accept the uncertainties embedded in the creation of the engineering systems that we want. and how that's kind of designing and changing through time. And as we do this, perhaps it's worth kind of rethinking what we consider as projects. Usually we think about projects as a sense of effort, so we need to put some amount of energy and bring a lot of resources to get the project to work. But on the top of that, we have also the purpose that is guiding our projects. As soon as we start actually going away from the classic iron triangle or more definitions of success that are more kind of tangible, and start thinking about project success, for example, as a more of a wicked problem, then we start having difficulties with the purpose, because how can we actually know that we're there? How can we know that we achieve the purpose of the project? And as soon as we solve some parts, then we actually are opening all sorts of other problems as well. Another thing that is interesting as we kind of move away from the kind of iron triangle as a way of, as the mindset for managing and creating success is temporality. And we know, and that's kind of the core definition of projects, that projects are meant to finish. They have this institutionalized termination. But again, if we're talking about this maturing process in an engineering system that is alive, that is always evolving, how do we know we're ready? When does one project finish and when the next one starts? And one of the ways would be to kind of think about the financial commitments. That would be one way around it. But if we're thinking more in terms of purpose, it's actually more of a maturing process. And in that regard, we can think about the managing of one project and the management of the portfolio of projects, almost like a parenting metaphor, going back to having a child as a complex program. In a similar way, we can think about the projectification of the engineering systems, like parenting the engineering systems, in which we kind of try to design part of it, but part of it will be evolving and will come at us in quite surprising ways. For example, in this photo, this is a photo of a friend of mine's child. And in the mobile phone, you can see her with 11 years old, and that's her in 13 years old. So it's kind of 2 years in between the photo on the phone and the photo that is the kind of the real photo. And she continues moving and changing, and it's kind of quite mind-blowing to see how the development is taking place and how quick it is, and how it is also difficult as parents to try somehow to guide, help the development, but also not being really able to impose our views into the development of the child. And in many ways, that will be the concept of the portfolio of projects, of mega projects in an engineering systems. We have some ideas, some directions we would like to encourage people to go, but we cannot impose those directions into the people managing it. Now, to have a very concrete example of how could we actually take this kind of fluffy ideas of the projectification of engineering systems into a concrete project example, we could look into the Sagrada Familia. Sagrada Familia is a really interesting project because it's a project that is a never-ending project, and it's already successful, even though it didn't finish. And it has been around for 184 years or something like that. So it's a very, very, very long-standing project. And as Gaudi would say, my client is not in a hurry, which is God. So the way of thinking about temporality changes completely. The way in which the project then transforms itself from being a project to being a portfolio of projects that are kind of evolving and changing and moving as the construction keeps going. And it's not a naive project because they are already receiving revenue from the entrance, from the ticket sales, and that is actually financing their construction project on site. So somehow they were able to not be naive in terms of creating a project that goes on forever and we would never be able to finance. So here we could actually kind of create something that a different way of considering projects that would kind of be managed as a portfolio that doesn't contain itself to the limitations of time, cost, and quality or predefined plans, but can actually evolve from that. And this example, by the way, is based on 2 students of mine in a project management class that developed essays suggesting this, just to acknowledge it. So now this is kind of one part of the ideas of the projectification of engineering systems. And for us then, as I mentioned before, the projectification, the concept of the projectification has kind of 3 different pillars. One of the pillars is a shift in the locus of the management. As we actually talk about the projectification of the engineering systems, we're not talking only about the management in the project, but we're talking about the management for the project, which if you'd like to read some more, that there's a work from Peter and I back in 2011, where we're talking about the institutional context for projects to create success that kind of gives them the possibility of having a project that functions. And also with Mia Matsua, we took this concept and evolved that into a portfolio level. So now we take this shift from the project to the portfolio level, and then we take a shift also in terms of the zeitgeist of our society. And there's a little bit of a more complex argument, so bear with me. We've seen throughout the last years, or last kind of 5 decades, more or less, a complete change in the way in which we're organizing society. A change that actually have been moving from a planned society, a society in which we would be able to control things and would be able to master and therefore also prove our future. It was quite, the future was the repetition of the past. And the work was, it dominated the way we worked, it dominated the way we actually lived in the society, and it obviously also dominated the way in which we're making projects. In that kind of world is a world of the iron triangle, is the world in which predictability is a value, is something we would like to achieve. Now, it's changing now. The way we perceive our work today, the much higher autonomy that many of us have the pleasure to have, allow us to develop the work the way we would like to have and bring the people that we would like to have into the work. So in this way, we actually talk about us organizing ourselves and our work, for that sake, through projects, to kind of temporal developments that we would then be moving from project to project. Now my project is giving the speech, and then from there I'm actually going to my other projects, like finishing a paper that I'm working on, and then writing my research proposals and so on. And all of us would then have this kind of portfolio of projects. And from that idea, what we see is that the action, in our case now here, the projects, open the space and the time and the relationships. So we don't have, for example, a party where there is the party takes place at the party hall, the festival hall. It takes place wherever the people are singing and dancing and doing whatever we do when we make parties. So it's the action of acting as a party that creates an open space for the party, not the space and the time. So now it's time to make a party, now it's time to make a speech, and hence we're actually doing it like that. In a project society, the action is the one that is defining the kind of space, the kind of time and the relationships that we create. We see that across everything. So the ideas of having a marriage that would just stay in forever is kind of not as much in vogue as it used to be. So what does that then mean for us in terms of managing projects and managing our portfolio of projects? So we're still talking about the same thing. So taken that in the zeitgeist we currently have, we're having people that are organizing themselves around projects and are being attracted to projects to develop themselves as people, to develop their own portfolio of projects. When we manage mega projects and manage projects in the portfolio of projects that we require for the engineering systems, we would like to be not allocating people to our projects. We are attracting them. We are providing them with some possibilities of creating a successful social capital or successful narrative capital to profile themselves, to give them meaning, to create connections and networks with other people. So which means the way we are managing people, the way we're engaging people into the project and get them to connect with one another has a different aura, a different form of existing in the current society today. And it's important for us to note because it will change the way in which we're using our current tools and processes and project management if we are to take the idea seriously. Now, finally, it also takes a final piece, which is more the theoretical piece in here, which is to look into the challenges we currently have. For example, the problem with success, the problem of kind of creating innovation and learning, even though we also have got to be efficient and don't have all the money and the time in the world. All those different contradictions and tensions we have in the way of managing projects today, we need to frame that in some way. My argument is that we should not just try to impose some sense of rationality and focus on the efficiency or effectiveness of the processes, but instead embrace the paradoxes and try to reframe them into something else. And in order to do that, one way around it would be to look at a constitutive view of paradoxes, which takes paradoxes not as a kind of a cognitive aspect, but rather a practice. So which means we create the paradoxes that we currently are faced by our actions, by the way we also interact with others and recreate our interactions. So in many ways, just like the Escher hand, the paradoxes we have in projects are not there independent of us, but they are actually part intertwined to the way in which we're managing. And this paper from Putnam, which is the basis for this form of seeing paradoxes, talks about 3 different forms in which managers can actually engage with paradoxes. And in particular, what I would like us to focus on is what I call the more than, or what they call the more than approach, which takes the paradox, which is this kind of contradicting poles, and reframe it into a different level, and thereby able to kind of go beyond the paradox and reframe in a new way. And that would be then the challenge for project managers and managers of this portfolio of projects and all sorts of different actors involved in that. So we would need, therefore, summarizing, if we're thinking about this projectification of the engineering systems, so which is kind of designing this engineering systems, accepting that the engineering systems are living social technical systems, we can think about it as parenting the engineering systems. And that means that we are dealing with a maturing process that is never ending. And hence our role also as parent would never end. We will be continuing the development of it. Then we're going to be addressing and transcending the current paradoxes we have. So we don't shy away from that. We don't try to overly simplify it. We embrace the paradox and we try to transcend it. And we can do that by also shifting our focus and locus of attention from the management inside of the project for the management of the project and for the project. And we do all of that taking into consideration the changes of our society today that much more focus on the project society, and therefore talk about attracting people into the projects and take for granted that we cannot define the future. Future is inherently uncertain. So therefore, we now have the basis of the concept. And we can talk about a couple of implications. So how am I in time, Elias? I can't hear you, so continue for another 5 minutes, or?
Yeah, let's say another 5, 6, 7 minutes tops.
Okay, so you stop me. Okay, now we can take as examples 4 different classic paradoxes in projects and see what could we actually do with this projectification of the engineering systems view that I'm proposing. So let me just push. So the first one is the idea of purpose. So as Kreiner would suggest, if we think about it in a more projectification sense, we're not talking about the purpose of a project and the development of a project as a leap into a designed future, a future that we're actually able to completely see and determine. But instead of that, we're talking about a project as a pursuit, something that we're actually striving to create and something that we need to have the courage to initiate. So, and therefore we're thinking more about the expected and the possible rather than what is probably happening. And the two images I'm having there, so on the one hand there's a paragliding, and that's just because taking the start of the project requires an immense amount of courage and commitment to this mega project, and we need to make it together with others, and this is really, really difficult. And as we are also in the middle of the project and things are not going well, taking projects as a pursuit means committing to it and means trying to get it right at the end, not in the outset. And therefore we see like the duck who is looking calm and giving people the confidence that things are in order, but behind the water is kind of pedaling like crazy and working really hard. So thinking about projects of pursuit and thinking about this projectification of mega projects is not about, okay, then we just take as it comes and then we move as it comes. We don't need to plan. We don't need any of those things. So we're quite the opposite. We are going to do the plans, but we also require on the top of that other things, much more courage, much more engagement, much more commitment to the projects we currently have. I've done a study on implementation of strategy, and we've done several interviews with senior managers trying to understand how they actually engaged with the creation of the purpose. And one of the things that they mentioned was what we called, as one of the kind of the paradoxes, what we called the ambitious realism. So on the one hand, they had this big dream, this big thing that they wanted actually to try to achieve. But on the other hand, they also needed to make sure that dream was not completely out there, completely unrealistic. And they were trying to balance the two and create it. And I mean, it comes from interview data. They use the term ambitious realism. You know, in a way, the ambitious realism has also to do with a battle in the middle ground between the facts, our plans, the amount of money we actually spend, and all those contracts and so on, which are really important and required, but also the fiction, the image, the things we would like to create, the ambition we currently have. So this comes from a conversation that I had with Christian Thusen before, and is currently in an EGOS call for paper. Now, thinking about this and embedding that into an example, we can think again into the Sagrada Familia. As Gaudi would say, so my client, God, is not actually in a hurry. So which means we can actually dare to think big, to have ambitious goals and find ways of creating and achieving that ambitious goals by organizing the project in a different way. So which means we don't have to be predefined and embedded within our constraints of, for example, finishing with a predefined time. We finish one part in a predefined time, but we actually continue on it, and we maintain our commitment to actually get the cathedral at some point, maybe done, or maybe not ever. So, and the point is just to continue with the commitment, with a commitment that's much bigger than ourselves. And in many ways, this relates with the current challenges that we face. So we think about purpose today and think, for example, of planetary boundaries. This is something that we are going to be needing to do and create a lot of commitment and continue working on. It's not a sprint, it's going to be a marathon, and it will require many projects, many mega projects for us to be moving in that direction. Of course, it has a caveat. If we'd like to do this, there's a sense of timing that is required. So there's a sense of urgency to get it done that we still need to deal with. So on the one hand, the idea of the Sagrada Familia and not having to hurry all the time is interesting, but on the other, we do need to perceive that some projects will require some level of hurriness. A second issue that we often face in projects is the balance between integration and fragmentation. So we know that basic ideas of managing projects is you divide it up and delegate into different people, and then you kind of try to put all the pieces of the puzzle back together. And we know how hard it is to make this to work and create a structure that allows that to work. Now, based on a study I've done together with actually another colleague from UCL called Sato Terricangas and Gustavo De Rolo, we talk about 3 modes of organizing that allows us to think about integration in different ways. I'm not going to go in detail in there, but it was just an illustration of how one can do that in a more practical way.
Joanna, excuse me. Yes? Can we please wrap it up so we can allow time for questions?
Yes.
Because we already have like 3 questions, and I bet there are more coming in.
And let me just move into here. So taken all of that, taken the so just a few final words. Taking the ideas of this portfolio of mega projects and the projectification of the engineering systems, there are a couple of things that we might like to look into the future. So I think we're still not done with success. We still require pragmatic and critical views together. And I'm very much looking forward to see what will happen with the recent special issue on success that is coming up. Also with the EGOS track that also focus on that direction. And maybe the ideas of sustainability and the bridge with Gil's works could actually give us some benefit. Also, in terms of the mega project portfolio management, it will be interesting to understand how we actually can lead, be part and govern such a portfolio and somehow nudge people to go into the right direction. Finally, in terms of innovation and projects, I mean, there's an immense amount of stuff that we can do there that we can still do and continue to do. And last but not least, the link between engineering systems as a community of work and projects is an obvious one, and it's partly there, but a little bit missing. So with that, thank you for your attention. And I'm just looking forward to seeing the questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joanna. Very, very interesting presentation and fascinating concepts described right there. I'm going to move right to the questions and answer box. So we have the first question by John Kilsey. Does the way in which we are taught to evaluate projects force us to prioritize direct short-term benefits and costs at the expense of longer-term value, including external benefits and costs, resilience in the acceptance of some unintended consequences? That there is a degree to which projects actually develop a longer life of their own outside of our control, not unlike bringing up a child. Does that require re-education of the client as well as the project manager?
I'm not sure it's unlike bringing up a child, but yes, I do think that it requires a re-education of everyone around it, and it's really difficult. And we know that. Wasn't it some of the discussions, John, that we had that the client, the constructor, the contractors would say that they are dancing in the clothes of someone else or with the shoes of someone else, which is the client. And I think more and more research, for example, from Graham Winch, looking into what it means to be the owner and what are the capabilities of the owner. And all this conversation has been going on in the UK of the intelligent client, and all the ramifications ever since on that. So absolutely, we need to change what it means to be a client and what it means to be a project manager.
completely agree with you. Second question by Dennis O'Keefe. Fascinating presentation, thanks. So what examples of mega or even major projects and programs outside the UK are there, please, that are implementing or are seriously contemplating these alternative perspectives?
I don't think any is, even inside of the UK, properly contemplating everything that I'm actually discussing. There's the idea of the Sagrada Familia as the way in which they're managing the project. It's a mega project, but it's being managed much more in a portfolio way, which is rather unusual. I think the UK has done a leap in our understanding of projects and also in our understandings of how to contract. And so I think UK is quite advanced in that regard. But all projects or all countries, so having said that, so all countries are doing a portfolio of mega projects in order to develop the engineering systems that we require. So thinking about, for example, projects around green transition and how people are working both on the side of creating mega projects with infrastructures like fusion, district heating, and implementation of wind turbines and so on at a higher level, but at the same time, also in the micro level, trying to get people like us and encourage us to start projects to change the way in which our home heating, for example, looks like. And there's been this work even in different levels, which also might be very interesting to look at. But I don't think that there's kind of that many that do governance, and I think UK is quite advanced in that regard. But again, I don't know everything. I don't know the situation in all the different countries. Denmark has also quite a few interesting mega project portfolio management, for example, in infrastructure, kind of transport infrastructure, but it doesn't go across everything. Yes, I would be curious to understand how China is doing it, because then we have a dictatorship that actually oversees things. To what extent would that kind of help or detriment would be interesting.
Excellent. Joram Reich has a very interesting question. Mm-hmm. So what are there any projects or systems in which your proposal would fail?
Yeah, probably. So I think that's actually an interesting question. So as I mentioned before, I've been thinking about this for a very long time, but this is the first time I actually put it all together the way I've done in here. So there's still an immense amount of thinking to do in this arena. I think in many ways we do it even though we don't look as if we're doing. So if I think, for example, here in Denmark we have a kind of a expectation of kind of taking the people with us and kind of managing in a more Scandinavian way. I think Sweden is even more than Denmark in that regard, participative and in the way in which they manage, and also participative, therefore also in the way in which they manage projects. And that participative approach that would just take more this kind of attracting perspective into being, collides then with current practices and models and systems that are in place, which means I think what we leave today is this. It's a lot of tensions and paradoxes happening, and therefore the question is whether this is a contingency problem or whether this is more an ontological problem. So if we think about it as a contingency problem, we can think, okay, there's a certain types of systems in which this way of thinking would not function, and therefore the question becomes, let's try to identify what kind of context we're in and what kind of context this form of thinking would work. Another way of looking at it is looking at it as an ontological question or a perspective. So we can look at any one of those systems from this angle and what can we get? And therefore the question is not whether it is like that, or it is the way in which or the model that I'm proposing, but more what kind of consequences can we take from this way of thinking into our practices and into our research. So just slight twist, and therefore then it doesn't become more of a contingency question, it becomes more of a perspective question. And then is it worth taking the perspective? Is it worth taking the trouble? Is then the big question.
We have a, sorry, you have anything else to add?
No, that's it.
Then comment by Jackie Glass. Thinking about what to distract, it feels to me that your approach invites us to review and rephrase some of the conventions within projects. And that could be done via a post hoc review of mega projects, project activities, archives, and policies. I am thinking about how this could or should be rewritten to reflect projectification. Might be a nice activity to imagine what Crossrail's purpose might look like if it was based on an ambitious reality.
Wonderful, yeah, absolutely, go for it. So, thank you. So it is interesting. We didn't finish going through all the things that, but in the chapter we talked indeed about Schumpeter and understandings of innovation. So if we are taking a Schumpeterian perspective, we do have it's not only about creativity, right, but it's also about destruction, and what are then the pieces that we can destruct. And it would be beautiful to be able to see finally a committee that would investigate a mega project and learn lessons that go beyond the lessons that we already know, because almost all of them go back to kind of what Tinto and Prescott would talk about, the 10 reasons why projects fail. I mean, we don't get that much better than that. And it can't be that we, through history, kind of keep learning the same things. So could we just take a fresh look and try to destruct some of the
I have a question, thinking about when we mentioned two of the biggest projects, Sagrada Familia and Crossrail, and the media hasn't been very friendly to the Crossrail saga. I'm wondering, what, if you know, what does the media say with the implementation, delivery, the opening of the Sagrada Familia, or is the media quite supportive that it has taken forever for the project to be built?
I think one thing is interesting about the Sagrada Familia is that it's financing itself. So there's no public money invested in it, as far as I understand. So I haven't done a thorough analysis of Sagrada Familia, but to be honest, it'll be my next step. I was fascinated with the fact that it was more kind of patrons that have financed the beginning, and now it's just everything being financed by the entry tickets. And then therefore they also manage it in a portfolio level. So they do it slowly and they do it continuously, and they care for the ambition and not for the completion on time. So they can just take forever, and that's actually an interesting thing to consider, a project that perhaps is not temporary. But again, so this particularly Sagrada Familia, it's a very new idea, and I've got to really give credit to my beautifully intelligent students that came up with the example. So it's a project management class that I teach, and from February until April, they had the challenge to learn things about projects. They knew nothing about it, so they had to learn about projects and then develop one angle about project management as their own. And that's what they came up with, or one of the groups came up with. I mean, brilliant. So now I need to go after their ideas and learn a little bit more about Sagrada Familia.
Quite intriguing. I realize we are past our time. So thank you very much for the presentation. It has been very insightful. And the questions have been fascinating, and the comments. I'm sorry I didn't have the time to read all of the comments that you left in the chat. However, the presentation is recorded and it will be made available on our website. So stay tuned, and don't forget we have another a final presentation with Richard Denufil and Michelle Carden from MIT and Imperial College, which is going to be in the beginning of June. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for coming.